What's up, everybody? Well, I was stoked. They were actually showing my videos to people, and I was getting a couple 300 subs a day. And then as soon as I put this video out, they shut it off. So I guess I'm back to being shadowban. But other people talk about it, and they're allowed to get 1 million views. That's awesome. But welcome to the new people that did find my channel. There's been some great comments lately. Sounds like you're enjoying it, so awesome. We're going to go to the island of Java, south of Vietnam, Cambodia, and screw it while we're here. Doesn't it look like something came in and hit right here and pushed the Himalayas up? Then I don't know if it filled up or water or if it was all just liquefied, but it looks like it all crashed over right here. Then that peninsula probably used to look like Florida, but now it all washed away out here into a bunch of islands. Maybe even Australia was connected to the mainland. Oh, wow. Yeah, so I did hear an Aboriginal story about how back in the day you could walk up and meet men with turbans, which is probably India. So maybe Australia was tucked in right here between India and Thailand. And as the Himalayas pushed up, it broke off, slid all the way down, and then left a string of islands going out through there. This huge bay on the top of Australia even fits in where it connected with Thailand. I don't know. I just came up with all that last part, but it does look like an impact right here, and it pushed the Himalayas up, and then it fell over here. But that would have been the very distant past. We're going to go to the 536 AD event and where the red mark is. This is the island of Java, and this is Borobudur Temple. Constructed of gray andesite-like stone, the temple consists of 9 stacked platforms, 6 square and 3 circular, topped by a central dome. It is decorated with 2,672 relief panels. The central dome is surrounded by 72 Buddha statues, each seated in a perforated stupa. So inside of every one of those is a Buddha statue, apparently. And I got to point this out. Everybody that talks about the lost advanced civilization that built everything, all of these Asian temples have thousands of carvings detailing their history. So I know a few things about who built this. They look Asian, they were Buddhist and Hindu, and they used horses and wagons. But you go with whatever makes sense to you. They've also got reliefs of the hero slaying the demon. And I think there might have actually been physical demons and monsters back in the day. I think the gods, whatever they were genetic engineers. And if they got mad at you, they'd just make a demon to go wipe your town out. The Aztecs in Mexico actually portrayed their god Huitzilopochtli with a face and mouth in his torso the exact same way. So how does that happen across oceans? But yeah, there's literally thousands of carvings showing what they were familiar with in their world. Just a quick refresher course. These are the big events in world history that we learned nothing about in school, but I come across evidence of this everywhere I look. 536 in the 1300s, and now a little island in the middle of nowhere is showing the exact same thing. Evidence suggests that Borobudur was constructed in the 8th century, which we'll get into in a bit, and subsequently abandoned following the 14th century decline of the Hindu kingdoms in Java and the Javanese conversion to Islam. So even on the little island of Java, they see the effects that the 1300s events had on that society. We can even go up north into modern-day Cambodia, Angkor Wat. And what do you know, in the 1300s was the decline of the Khmer Empire. Just last video, I read accounts of this in China, France, Germany, Syria, Egypt, even in America up in the Great Lakes region. So there's no question in my mind that there was a major event about 700 years ago. They say that this is the largest Buddhist temple in the world, bigger than Angkor Wat, in size of one single temple. There are thousands of structures in Angkor Wat proper, and it was bigger than London at the time. There are no known records of construction or the intended purpose of Borobudur, and they have estimated the construction date by comparing carved reliefs found at the base of the temple with other 8th and 9th century structures. So they've estimated it around that time frame, but really nobody knows. It was vaguely mentioned in 1365 in the Nagarak Redagama, which starts out with the name Naga, the ancient serpent deities. And in there, they describe trading with the entire South Pacific over there, all these places. So just like the rest of the world, they appear to be weaker and more primitive after the 1300s events. When the Dutch and the British showed up hundreds of years after this, they had basically forgotten about this place. It was almost completely buried in ash up until 1814. And it was just talked about by the locals in folk stories and was associated with bad luck and misery. And you can see here, it wasn't just buried in ash. You can see that the earth was shifting and the stupas are drooping. And they had a story of a prince who broke taboo and went out here and visited this place. And it says, the prince took such pity on the knight who was captured in a cage that he could not help coming to see his unfortunate friend. So he's talking about the Buddha in these stupas, and this probably happened long after Islam had taken over, and apparently they had lost all knowledge of the Buddha. So instead of him seeing the Buddha in meditation here, he thought he was a prisoner. I would kind of see that as society backsliding, kind of like Europe is full of the ancient stone bathhouses from the Roman era, but then Middle Ages, they didn't shower at all. The Native Americans thought they were absolutely disgusting, which they were. They brought all these diseases with them. But yeah, the young prince saw the Buddha and thought he was a knight that had been captured. And what we see today, pretty much like every ancient monument, is a modern rendering of what they thought it might have looked like. Just like everything in Mexico, it looks like somebody got mad and slammed their fist down on the chessboard and all the pieces just were tossed. This is not just from being buried in volcanic ash. So just for reference, keep your eye on this pole in the background here. So the whole earth just shifted like 15 feet in 1 second. So it could have been something like that. Also in a quake, there'll be uplift and the ground will kind of buck. Earthquakes are weird. I've experienced several of them out in California, and it can go from undulating to just a sharp jolt. And then another thing that can leave wreckage behind like this is a tsunami, which this area is quite well known for. I'd say the South Asian islands are the last place you want to be during one of these cycles because they're just full of volcanoes. But what is not generally appreciated is that an old Javanese manuscript kept in the royal palace of the Sultan of Surakarta describes yet another natural catastrophe of gargantuan proportions. In Catastrophe, an investigation into the origins of the modern world by David Keyes, which I've been trying to find, he draws our attention to Java's Book of Ancient Kings, which appears in two distinct versions, one compiled in 1869 and a second that dates from the mid to late 1880s. Both documents describe a volcanic eruption on Java that was centered on Mount Batuwara. A great glaring fire which reached to the sky came out of the mountain, states one version of the text. There was a furious shaking of the earth, total darkness, thunder, and lightning. Then came forth a furious gale together with torrential rain, and a deadly storm darkened the entire world. Not only did this heavy rain not extinguish the eruption of fire, but it made it worse. The eruption described in the text appears to have unleashed boiling tidal waves of steam, sulfur, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide, which subsequently spread outward in all directions. The volcano subsequently collapsed and sank into the earth with a tremendous roar. The explosion was so massive that it also caused large areas of land to sink below the sea level. Afterwards, quote, when the water subsided, it could be seen that the island of Java had been split in two, thus creating the island of Sumatra. So today there's a strait between the two islands right here, and that is a 15-mile gap. So this all used to be connected, and now it's separated by 15 miles of ocean. That's huge. Now, in a separate manuscript, the Golden Chersonese, it presents a list of the known tribute missions that the Malay Peninsula city-states sent to China during the 6th century Common Era. There are reports that 10,000 men came from all directions to meet in the city-state of Tun Sun on each and every market day. So that's quite the flea market. But, this is the 6th century, and that's how culture worked back then. These weren't all isolated kingdoms, and the smaller ones went and paid tribute to China. Then, for no apparent reason, these highly lucrative annual events ground to a complete halt after the departure of the Malay trade mission of 536 AD. At that time in the history of the southern kingdoms, 2 roars of thunder emanating from the southwest were heard as far away as Nanking. Clouds of yellow dust soon followed that rained down like snow for an entire year, by which time it had accumulated to such an extent that the Chinese could scoop it up by the handfuls. Now, the author of this paper points out the dating on this and says Java's Book of Ancient Kings incorporates elements which are entirely consistent with what modern-day geologists have been able to deduce scientifically about volcanic eruptions. Although these old Javanese documents date the catastrophe as having occurred more than a century before the year 536 AD, this discrepancy in chronology can plausibly be explained as the result of copying and compilation errors. Palm leaf manuscripts did not survive for very long in Java's unforgiving tropical environment. So I talk about this quite a bit, but this is why we call our history comparative history, is you take the history of one culture and you compare it against the rest. And I'll tell you, the date of this all having occurred in 536 AD is an agreed upon date. But as you can see here in the Javanese manuscripts, it's more than 100 years off. So when I hear about nonstop incessant rain for 2 to 3 months in England in 1314, and then the exact same thing in China in 1333, it sounds to me like the same event. They've just got the dates off in comparative history. And after a while, everything is a copy of a copy. So going back to the 1300s, yeah, things are off by a few decades, no problem. And then dealing with like ancient Mediterranean culture, everything is compared against Egyptian history because everybody in the ancient Mediterranean world traded with Egypt, and you can see a solid progression all through Egyptian history, and then you just compare the artifacts that they were trading with other cultures, and that's how they date them. But the problem with the big picture of that is the Western world didn't know anything about Egypt until the late 1700s, Napoleon era. So even Isaac Newton has done a different chronology of the ancient world, and it was off by thousands of years in some cases. Then most of you have heard me speculate, wondering whether the 1300s and 536 AD event were the same thing, but we find geological and archaeological evidence of the 536 AD event. And here's my theory on that. If the Western world added a bunch of time to their calendar, then it was just added in the Western world, but all of these Eastern civilizations, 536 AD was still 1500 years ago. So I wonder if the geological, archaeological evidence showing the 536 AD event isn't the Bronze Age collapse. So if you picture the world as basically the Roman era ended in the 1300s with that big event, and then the Church of Rome added a bunch of time in there, then that would mean that the Greco-Roman era was the cycle just previous to that, which happened just after the Bronze Age collapse. So that would put the Bronze Age collapse 1500 years ago, and then was the Greco-Roman era, and then they collapsed in the 1300s. And the Dark Ages never happened. You see what I'm saying? I don't know if that's true or not, but it does work. But no matter which way you look at that, there was a major event about 1500 years ago and 700 years ago, and apparently the one 1500 years ago ripped this island in half. And then nobody up north in China heard from anybody for 7 years. I don't know if that's when Borobudur was buried. I kind of get the feeling that it was actually more recent than that, probably during the 1300s event. But like I said, this whole area is nothing but volcanoes everywhere and is probably the last place you want to be during one of these cycles. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. I'll catch you on the next one. Static out.